every minute is actually curated. And so although it feels like total chaos, there is a program, and there are some people that will follow that program. They'll go, okay, we want to see that band and that band, or we want to see that piece of street theatre, or that parade starting there. We know the people that are in that, or what it is. So it's there are some people that will be picking those kind of things out of the program. There are other people that will just trip across the festival totally and be surprised at every corner.
Kia ora and welcome to Workmates podcast. My name is Benjamin and I am the creative director here at Work Agency, a creative marketing agency on Cuba Street in Wellington. It's only fitting that today I'm talking with Drew James, the festival director for CubaDupa, a world-class free street festival filled with art, music, food, culture abound. And over the course of two days, you take over Cuba Street and turn it into an absolute wonderland of color, of festivities, of entertainment, and of participatory art. Drew, you have quite the resume, if I could just rattle it off, in terms of your sort of 30-year experience across performing arts management and festival direction. Some of the highlights, you were the business manager at Toi Whakaari, New Zealand Drama School. You also produced and directed WOMAD for a period of time, and you are the originator and creative force behind CubaDupa since 2016, as well as being the director of Classical on Cuba. So sounds like you're quite busy, but it sounds like you are passionate about art and culture, which I'm absolutely excited to talk to you about today. The first question I have for you is, as the producer, the director of CubaDupa, this incredible festival that I suppose surprises and delights over 100,000 people that come to participate in it over the course of the weekend. What is a moment for you that even you, as the person that kind of knows what's happening, the program, you've put it together, what's a moment that for you looked around, one of those moments where you're like, is this really happening? A double take, a surreal moment, something that was just so incredible for even you knowing kind of what was coming.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, the overall experience of seeing the audience transform and the space transform every year kind of really does it to me as well. You can't control what people are going to come up with as an audience, what costumes they come in, whether you've got somebody walking around as a bucket fountain, or things that we don't program that kind of end up being very much a part of the festival. Those are the things that really surprises me every single time. We've got an amazing amount of hospitality and businesses down the street, and we bring all of those out onto the footpath. So we offer that opportunity for those cafes to come out onto the footpath and create a street food festival, which is, gives you the sights and sounds and smells of that side of it. But yeah, it's a festival where every minute is actually curated. And so although it feels like total chaos, there is a program, and there are some people that will follow that program. They'll go, okay, we want to see that band and that band, or we want to see that piece of street theatre, or that parade starting there. We know the people that are in that, or what it is. So it's there are some people that will be picking those kind of things out of the program. There are other people that will just trip across the festival totally and be surprised at every corner. There could be a piece of street theatre happening, somebody hanging off an aerial rig between two buildings, those kinds of things. So it's like, as you kind of move around the site, you trip across these different experiences, and really that sense of journey and that sense of discovery is something that we're really trying to create as much as possible. We couldn't do the festival if everyone stood still. So it's kind of the whole concept behind it is that we keep people moving around the site, finding new things, or following a parade, or going and sitting in a bar for a while with their friends. But the whole thing works because people move from one place to another in the site, and we fill every kind of nook and cranny. And then it's also about those projects where we've commissioned them, but we've created space for the creative or the artistic, opportunity. and you don't quite know what's going to happen in that space. You kind of know, what the parameters are on one level, but you actually just don't know what's going to happen in the middle. And that's happened in a number of projects where there's a jam session that kind of gets created by two parades colliding in the middle of the street, and you go, oh well, what's going to happen here? Oh right, that's great. Or I guess kind of from a more program point of view, the experience that we had with going to John Tharsis, a classical composer, and saying, what would be a symphony of the street for you? And he said, well, the first thing I need to do is go and experience CubaDupa. I've never been. I'll come and tell you afterwards what I'd like to do. And, when we met afterwards, he said, well, CubaDupa is like, it's huge and it's chaotic and it's full of different experiences. I'd like to subvert that and, create a 10-minute piece which everybody on the site experiences at the same time. So that meant turning off all of the sound systems down the street. It meant kind of like creating a speaker system down the street that was able to pan. It included, creating live performances with, over 20 groups that lined all the way down. And John masterfully, created different compositions for each of those and then unified it with an overall composition. It had never been done before, and it kind of came out of that experience. I really had no idea kind of whether that was going to work. I mean, we put all of it, all the things in place to try and make that work, but we had no idea what it was going to be. And then when you were standing in the middle of the street and there's that kind of shiver that comes down the spine when you look at people kind of around you responding to it, and often really emotionally, but everybody was unified but in different ways. It was just the most extraordinary project from that point of view. And you just go, right, that's why we do it.
Mm-hmm. Was it like a spiritual experience for you? Was it quite profound?
I think it was a spiritual experience for everybody, really. It was you just don't, it's something that not anybody's experienced before, and so that idea of kind of, being immersed in a soundscape that was, multi-directional, and also having, wherever you stood on the street, you're going to have a different experience all the way down the street. Some people ran from one end of the street to the other. Some people just stood exactly where they were. But there was just like this focus and concentration for 10 minutes, which in the middle of this festival, which was kind of on one level the opposite of that. So yeah.
One thing that I'm aware of, over the years, you increasingly been intentional about what does it look like for the boundaries between the performer and the audience to sort of blur and even break down, right? That it's very much like the energy. It's not just that people come and they observe something happening, but that they are participants in the experience, right? And so looking forward to CubaDupa this year, what do you think that looks like for 2024? How are the different ways that people can, as they come to sort of partake in the festival, also give back and participate in it as they go?
I think one of the things we've done this year is, from a theme point of view, Find Your Wild is a great way of kind of encouraging people to respond to that. So things like the Batucada group. So we've got 4 Brazilian Batucada groups, 3 of which come from other places in New Zealand, and they kind of all gather over the CubaDupa weekend. So they have, every year they come with a different theme and a different kind of costume, and different ideas about what they're doing, and they're kind of quite competitive. So what we've noticed is that our audience really like following those groups and participating. They're kind of the tail of the parades a lot of the time. So we've opened that up and said, okay, well, look, these are the themes for these groups. This is how you can kind of participate. So any way that we can kind of encourage people to kind of be a part of that, it's it kind of comes quite naturally. So you just have to kind of, I think, just give those little points and kind of hints to people, and kind of amazingly people respond. I mean, CubaDupa is a good one. I mean, we've kind of developed this reputation for doing mass music events as part of CubaDupa. So usually every year we'll have one commissioned mass music event. And this, we've had trombones, we've had the Battle of the Bones, down the street, and we've had Cuba Tuba, and we've had mass Cuba Street orchestras and all sorts of things. But this year I was just looking for something that had a wider participation option, which, lots of kids play, but lots of adults play, and there's kind of groups that form. And the idea was about, kind of thinking about how we bring that together in a way that, is really celebratory, but creates something that is really quite different. So CubaDupa is, I think we've got 230 ukulele players registered at the moment. And so, these range from schools right through to community groups. They form into a parade and then they go towards the stage. And then there's a mass ukulele event that's coordinated by Kiwalele with a ukulele band afterwards. But at the end of the day, we don't actually know exactly what it's going to be like because we've never done it before. And that's really, really exciting from my point of view.
I think it's hard for people who haven't been to CubaDupa to kind of imagine the scale of the sights and the sounds and just the energy. You as someone who's been to CubaDupa, you just to stand there and to imbibe just the cacophony of activity around you it's overwhelming in a good way, in the sense that it's like life abounds in all its forms and all its glory and all its expressions, right? So I suppose for you, do you think it's do you feel like it's quite you play a special or some sort of role in, I suppose, in the overall tapestry of Cuba Street and people's perception of this particular street?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we spend a lot of time going down the street and talking to people that either live here or have businesses here as well. And there's some really interesting people out there, and there's a lot of independence, and there's a lot of kind of passion about what they're doing, and whether they're businesses that are, very visible on the street, or businesses like yours that are kind of, hidden away up a kind of narrow stairwell. There's a lot of people kind of thinking about really great ideas, and I think there is something about that energy which just really does make Cuba Street. I think from a Wellington point of view, what CubaDupa does is it creates an amazing range of images every year which get used by everybody. And so whether it's kind of the Wellington NZ doing their kind of marketing of Wellington, or whether it's just, what's the photo that kind of, celebrates the vibrancy of the city, often those are photos of not even necessarily performers at CubaDupa, but people in the streets, having a good time. And I think, that's a really important aspect of what CubaDupa is. It's kind of like it creates that social environment for people where they feel really safe. The roads are closed. They can wander around the environment really freely. It has a very, earlier on in the day, it has a very family atmosphere to it, but it doesn't kind of lose itself in being a big party. Either. So it kind of has that balance of being an arts festival or a creative space and a safe creative space amongst what also looks like a quite chaotic, street party environment. And that, for me, that's the really interesting thing about how you create that vibe and that safety, in a very porous, urban environment. I mean, we can't stop people from coming in, and we can't stop people from, behaving in particular ways. But for some reason, the environment and the program and all of those things that kind of become part of that tapestry create something where people smile and they dance on the street and they they follow parades, or they stop in their tracks and they see something that they've never seen before. And for me, that's the real joy of kind of what that brings to Wellington. And, I hope that there are aspects of that then kind of creep into how people, experience the street on an ongoing basis.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, I think that, in creating this this space and giving this permission for people to participate and engage with it on their own terms, you're bringing out the best in people, in the sense that you're providing these moments for people to be surprised with joy. And I think, the world needs a lot more of that. And I think, it's to be outside of your comfort zone, to come to a festival that may seem chaotic on the surface, or maybe you don't know what you're going to experience, you don't quite know what is in store, and to come out the other end, I suppose not just surprised, but challenged even at times, I suspect, and experiencing and imbibing all that is on offer, rather than worrying about this or that, life, is hectic, right? Life has its challenges, and to come into a space that you can kind of lay those down for a little while, and just accept everything on offer, that all that is good about art and culture and music and food and community and connection. I think it's an incredibly beautiful thing to facilitate. Thank you on behalf of Wellingtonians and beyond for what I can only imagine is an immense effort from yourself, and obviously a much wider team to facilitate that sort of space, because I think Wellington's better for it. In terms of, I suppose, other ways that CubaDupa may have facilitated or sort of activated or empowered artists and musicians or whoever to pursue their own passions and careers, do you have any sort of good stories on sort of how CubaDupa may have been a springboard or a part of someone's journey to go on to be, I don't know, whether it's a professional artist or musician, or, it's really elevated them in their profile?
Yeah, I mean, there are, a number of artists who have, created projects over the time of CubaDupa, which have gone on to other things. I mean, I think of Binge Culture, for example. I mean, one of the things that they were doing was trying to look at how we could create parallel experiences for people as part of CubaDupa, and that, the way that came about was, using, for example, text to guide people through particular experiences, while everybody else was, participating in a different way. So, this idea of kind of having these, parallel programs that you could kind of operate, or these projects. So, that's part of that, as an area that they've developed as PickPath. Hasn't been directly through CubaDupa, but it's been kind of part of their exploration of what that could be. And it's about how they can guide people on journeys, like curated journeys, whether it's through a museum or a gallery space, but also through a really hectic festival program,
or a walking tour of a city,
for a walking tour of a city, yeah, or so kind of like looking at kind of where we can create those very individual experiences for people, within this other environment. Another project which wasn't, created specifically for CubaDupa, but was influenced by how it was presented at CubaDupa, was, Malia Johnson doing, a piece called Torua, where it was a dance piece that you had headphones for, and you could follow the dancers around the streets, and you could swap the soundtrack that you were listening to on your headphones. Now, there were 100 pairs of headphones, and so you had these dancers going through the streets performing. You had 100 people following them with headphones, experiencing soundtracks that other people couldn't hear, and then you had an audience watching the dancers as they were going through the street. And it was kind of like, so there's that kind of that parallel experience, which again, I'm really excited about. How can you have a kind of a personalized experience alongside this kind of big festival experience. The John Tharsis work, Cuba Sonic, where you can kind of create or you can work with an artist to create a vision which really has never been done before. We've presented his work in different ways, again, but it's that individual artist has the opportunity to play on one level with a mass audience. How do you influence a mass audience, or how do you present to a mass audience, or how do you present to a segment of that audience or an individual in that audience? And I find that really, really interesting. And it comes through that kind of, that creativity and partnership with those artists.
That's awesome. You mentioned before PickPath and sort of, I guess that's sort of a slight like augmented reality kind of application. What does the festival have in store, depending on how much you can say at this point, in terms of what, I suppose, how the brand and how branded elements for the festival may be expressed, whether that's physically or even through things like AR technology?
Yeah, we're playing with a few things. So, this idea of find your wild and kind of like what that looks like, from an illustration point of view. I was going to say brand, but it's more than that. It's more about kind of like, how you, express that idea from a visual point of view and a design point of view. So the work have done in regards to doing that have kind of created some things that we can then springboard off. So one of the illustrations has, a vine or vines winding their way up power poles and light poles down the street. So we're going to try and recreate that in a very physical way, that becomes part of our site decor. It becomes something that we can potentially use in the future. We're working on a project where, yes, there's a kind of AR experience where you can kind of walk down the street and you can, find a QR code, and then you can hold your phone up and you can see a different world. And so that idea of kind of creating, we create a physical world that looks different than it did yesterday, but then we can start playing with how you kind of create this other imaginary world that you can see through digital technology. And I'm really excited about those kind of opportunities as well, because I just think it's about changing perception or creating those opportunities for artists to create different ways of experiencing a space.
Yeah, and you alluded to sort of I suppose the many layers that people can engage the festival on. It's like it's either directly engaging with the performance or even watching the people engaging with the performance, and then going a sort of another layer back. It's like engaging with sort of augmented reality pieces that are sort of superimposed or layered over that physical space and that time. And so it's people can, at different levels and layers, kind of interact in a way that maybe it's something that they're interested in, but maybe it's something that they haven't engaged with before, and it's surprising and it's challenging even. But you're providing multiple on ramps to participation, right?
Absolutely, and it's really it kind of depends on what those projects are, how many people engage with it, and on one level it doesn't really matter whether it's kind of like 10 people or whether it's 1,000 people. I think some of the best feedback that I've ever had is from people that kind of go into CubaDupa not really knowing what they're going to go and see and just kind of like rolling with it, and then they kind of come back, they're with a group of friends and they all come back with different experiences that they have had as individuals within that experience. So not everybody experiences the festival in the same way. In fact, nobody experiences the festival in the same way. There's always going to be something that they see or do that nobody else does in the same way.
Yeah.
And there's something that's really, really joyful about that. And I remember somebody saying that they didn't even know that CubaDupa was on, and it happened to be their birthday. They just arrived in Wellington and they got dropped off, on one of the corners, and within 5 minutes they were in a dance parade. and then they kind of got spat out at the end of the day at 12 o'clock going, what just happened? And isn't that extraordinary?
That's certainly a birthday to remember. It's I think about, I imagine there are hundreds of different activations in the program, and then you have thousands of, tens of hundreds of thousands of people interacting with them in different ways at different times. So there must be millions of different permutations of possible experiences within that weekend, right? It really is kind of, the head can't quite wrap itself around just how unique every single experience could be for each individual person.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, even if you're kind of looking at a parade that's going down Cuba Street, I mean, it really depends on where somebody is when they see that parade. And what is actually happening and who those other people are that are around at the same time and what that space is. It's, sometimes it's about what the weather is as well. But it's, it is. It's just kind of like this, it's another world that you kind of enter. And it's when, if people are in that kind of mindset, that they're open to entering that world in whatever way and experience it takes, then something magical happens.
Awesome. That's great. And just thinking about the community of CubaDupa, obviously you bring together over 100,000 people across the course of that weekend, right? And that is the CubaDupa community, the performers, the audience, the sort of symbiotic relationship between the two. What does community building or community sustaining even look like for CubaDupa throughout the rest of the year? Again, we're holding this sort of as this one weekend thing, but at the same time, there's something of the spirit of it that remains, right? And so what does it look like for you to hold something of CubaDupa throughout the rest of the year, the other 363 days?
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's a certain legacy, that does exist, over the year. I mean, whether it's kind of, the vibe at Rogue and Vagabond or the performances that are happening there, or, creating the environment for, Southern Cross to be hosting kind of ongoing performances, or working with some of those venues, to kind of keep that kind of energy going. I mean, we can't take responsibility for that in any way, but it's, it's part of, I think, a kind of legacy that we, think we're involved in. It's a hard one. We spend all year organising CubaDupa, so our communication with our community does continue right through the year in regards to looking towards what's going to happen, or what happened the year before, and what's going to happen next year. Those, we're communicating with our community, all the time on that basis. But yeah, it would be, I guess the other things that we do as an organisation. So, CubaDupa has Creative Capital Arts Trust as the kind of umbrella organisation, and we also do the New Zealand Fringe Festival, and we do Classic on Cuba. And so, New Zealand Fringe is a big open access festival, one of the largest arts festivals in New Zealand. Certainly the biggest fringe festival in New Zealand. And, there's a whole lot of legacy that comes out of that. There are performers that kind of, cut their teeth on fringe, and then, ongoingly there's performances in theatres, etc. Classic on Cuba is an interesting one. It kind of came out of CubaDupa being cancelled in 2020. And part of our community, and a very important part of our community, are the local businesses. And so when we cancelled in 2020, it was like, the people that are really losing out on this are our hospitality venues. They're the ones that are going to really go down. So how can we help them? And we worked with Orchestra Wellington, who also had some capacity because they had an opera that had been cancelled as well through COVID. So we came up with a concept of breaking the orchestra up and putting them in hospitality venues around Wellington, and encouraging audiences to come. and it kind of created a whole range of different experiences, but also ways that people could access classical music. And so by breaking the orchestra up into these small groups and doing kind of half-hour shows in hospitality venues, you were also giving that audience an opportunity to access work that they would not necessarily have seen otherwise. And then, again, it's kind of about creating that accessibility, but at the same time supporting our community, which were the hospitality venues, to get people in their doors and buying food and refreshment.
Yeah, I think classical. I mean, I do like a little bit of classical music. I wouldn't say I'm an aficionado, or I'm not a regular patron of live performance. But I think I think, and we've got some connections with some other organizations that are in the classical music world, and there is a concerted effort to again innovate, I suppose, when it comes to how classical music is performed, where it's performed, and the way that it's made more accessible to audiences beyond the traditional sort of expressions of and locations of classical music and the audiences those sorts of sort of experiences would typically facilitate for. So it's really cool to see your finger in a number of pies when it comes to making art and culture more accessible to people in a number of different ways at different times of the year. Would you say that that's sort of and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it as sort of an animating motivation for you to make art and culture music more accessible?
Personally, absolutely. I think throughout my career, that's what I've been most focused on, is like, how do we break down those barriers of elitism for arts. And
I was sort of dancing around it, but you put it bluntly.
Yeah, and I mean, look, the reality of elitism is it kind of comes out of the ability for people to be able to overcome the barriers that make it elitist. And so some of those barriers are ticket price, and some of those barriers are experience and opportunity. All of those things can be overcome. And if I'm able to contribute that by finding the money to pay the artists to perform for free or to perform for a very low ticket price, then I'm kind of achieving those aims from my own personal point of view. And quite apart from the fact that the kind of the understanding of what's classical or what's traditional is constantly changing, and it's only been really, I mean, thinking about kind of the experience that I've had with WOMAD, it was really only in the 80s that WOMAD started with Peter Gabriel, and the kind of term world music was actually brought forward, and it was really about acknowledging that every culture has their superstars or their particular refined arts that really other people don't know about because they might not have been there, and I mean that has changed a lot over the last 20 years because through internet and all the rest of it, things have become a lot more accessible, but that's part of our changing world. And so classical on Cuba really explores those boundaries, those cultural boundaries and innovation boundaries on the basis of what is classical, and puts them in kind of environments where people feel like they're a lot more relaxed, so they don't have to walk through the door of a theatre, or where they might not necessarily feel as comfortable. They can go and sit and have a beer in a pub and listen to something that's just really refined and extraordinary.
Yeah, that's right. It's not just the ticket price, for say going to the opera house. It's the social. There's a social layer to it, right? There's a certain, walking through the doors, a certain even dress code, a certain community of people that you could feel like you were on the outside quite easily if you didn't have certain markers of status or success or what have you. So to sort of democratize and I guess subvert expectations around where certain types of art and music are expected to be and who they are performed for. I think, as a noble endeavor.
Yeah, it's one of the experiences we had with CubaDupa in 2019 was we had an outdoor street festival, and in Christchurch they had the massacre about 2 weeks prior. And so suddenly there was a really heightened security risk in regards to large-scale outdoor events. And basically we could not afford as an organisation to and we didn't have the people either to create an environment that we could say was safe. We just didn't have the amount of security available to be able to do that. And so we took the festival, we didn't cancel the festival, we took the festival indoors, which was a really interesting process for an outdoor festival. The Opera House happened to be available, like no one had booked it. And so we were able to take our main stage performances or one of our large stage performances and put them into the Opera House and open the doors. And so we were given the Opera House for free. And we were able to open the doors, and the number of people that I experienced going, we've never been into the Opera House before, was extraordinary. Again, it was just kind of like, really? But it makes sense, and so it's that kind of, it is about the democratization, but it's about the opening of the doors, and it's about the opening of minds, and all of those things to kind of give people that opportunity.
That's right. Yeah, there's sort of a subversion of expectations that then creates space for the surprise and the delight, right?
Yeah, no, totally.
That's wonderful. Cool. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today, Drew. It's been fascinating. I'm very much looking forward to CubaDupa 2024. Just tell us, when can we expect to participate in the glory that is CubaDupa this year?
It's 23rd and 24th of March, so Saturday and the Sunday. It's about 18 hours of programmed entertainment, and then everything else that kind of happens outside that time that we don't program and other people program. So yeah, it's going to be a massive year again, I'm sure.
Amazing. Well, thank you again, and thanks for everybody for tuning in. I was chatting with Drew James, the Festival Director of CubaDupa. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.